Welcome to the Texas A&M Division of Information Technology's Technically Speaking TV. I'm your host, Adam Mikeal. Imagine turning on your computer to a message stating that all of your data is encrypted, and if you want it back, you must pay a certain amount of money by a set date. You've been hit by ransomware, malicious software that's used to set up this online version of kidnapping. Obviously, you can't lose all of this data, so it's tempting to pay the criminals. But should you pay? Are there ways to protect yourself or your business from becoming a victim? Today we're joined by the Honorable Jill Sklar, Judge of Jackson County, Texas, and Andy Bennett, the Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Texas. Unfortunately, Judge Sklar has firsthand experience with ransomware as Jackson County was hit in May of 2019, crippling the county offices and forcing a return to pen and paper. Judge Sklar, first off, thank you for being here. How did you learn there was a problem? What was your first indication that you had an issue with the computer systems in the county?
So everyone shows up for work on Tuesday after Memorial Weekend, and the dispatcher's having a hard time logging onto their computer. Our IT professionals remote into the system and see lots of activity happening on the district attorney's computers.
And when you say dispatcher, is that the 911 dispatcher?
Yes, yes. Once we get into the system, we see that we have been encrypted by the Ryuk ransomware, and immediately go to check our backups, and a poison pill is initiated that starts reformatting our entire backup system.
When you checked it?
Yes. So at that point, all systems were shut down, and we knew we had a big problem.
And what was the ransom that they were asking to pay to recover the data?
Yeah, it was $362,000 in Bitcoins.
In Bitcoins?
Right.
Wow.
Way more than our county could afford to pay at the time.
Right. So Andy, this was just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not very long after this, 23 local towns were hit by a coordinated ransomware attack. This was in August?
Yes, August 16th.
What was the state's role in helping to remedy these situations?
At the state, we have a number of resources available, and our primary role is consultative. Anybody, regardless of scale of the attack that they're under or the situation they're facing, can call us and ask for advice, checklists, resources, etc. And when I say resources, that has a number of different potential meanings. If it's a resource in terms of we don't know what to do, please help us, we'll point them to those. And if it's a resource of we don't have enough people, please help us, we'll point them to those. We have some contracts that they can leverage. We have some folks that they can leverage sometimes depending on the nature of the incident. And then in the event of an actual disaster, such as in May for Jackson County and August for the 23 that were impacted, a disaster declaration frees open a lot more resources in terms of National Guard cyber protection teams, which we can then deploy. And in August, it was actually a gubernatorial declared disaster, which also activates the State Operations Center. And so we were doing 24/7 operations just like a hurricane using National Guard troops.
Wow. And when Jackson County was hit, before that, who declared the disaster at that time?
That would have been myself. We were pretty much stuck. We didn't know what to do. We felt like we were recovering from a hurricane. We had just been hit, and so the only thing that we knew the process on how to get assistance from the state, and we needed that assistance. So I declared a cyber disaster, and we sent up the STAR request to the governor's office for additional assistance, and that's how I met Andy and the Texas Military Department, who came down to help.
Wow. Did the county ever consider actually paying the ransom?
Not really. It's one of those things that our local officials looked around and said, we do not want to perpetuate this kind of activity. We don't want to reward bad behavior. We're going to figure out a way to recover from this without giving them the money that they want. And we were able to do that. It was painful, but we were able to recover.
Ultimately, you were able to restore your data?
Not really.
Not
really.
When
I talked about the backup being encrypted, we sent it to a company in California. They were not able to get any of the data back. We were able to find a backup that was 9 months old later when we're working through the process. So instead of losing 20 plus years of work product, we lost about 9 months.
Wow. Still pretty damaging.
Yes.
How long were you running without computer systems at all?
Well, the first 10 days we were pretty much without computers. Once the military got there to help us get computers back on, we slowly were able to restore services. We had some critical services that we had to get going as soon as possible, and that's what they helped us do. We pretty much had to redesign our entire computer system because we knew we had to come back stronger than we were before. So that was part of what they helped us do in getting back on track.
Of course. Thanks, Jill. Stay with us. Technically Speaking TV will be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Technically Speaking TV. Andy, are there any tips that you would suggest for dealing with a ransomware attack?
Sure. So cybersecurity, just like anything, is all about fundamentals, and understanding what the fundamentals are crucial to being able to avoid being hit or being a victim. Nothing can stop the bad guys from trying to attack you, but understanding what the fundamental steps you can take to make yourself a harder target can prevent that attack from being successful. One of the most basic cybersecurity fundamentals is network segmentation. And the difference between a flat network and a segmented network: in a flat network, if the bad guy gets in from anywhere, they can get to anything. But in a segmented network, if they get into one part, they can't get to everything else. So in a ransomware attack, network segmentation means that even though they got into one segment and may have been able to attack one piece of your network, they can't get to everything else. So in the case of a county, they maybe come in and attack the business function of the front office, but they can't get to the courts, they can't get to the sheriff, they can't get to the county clerk, because those things are all separated. And so when you take a look at what your business is, you need to make sure that you understand which business functions need to be able to talk to each other and which ones can stand a little more process between them. And then backups, 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 backups. If you don't have good backups, you are just setting yourself up for a bad day. And not even necessarily from a cyber attack, because if your servers fail, which they sometimes fail, and you don't have a good backup strategy, you'll lose your data. And it doesn't matter that you didn't lose it to a bad guy, you still lost your data. So having offline separated backups is a critical fundamental that can help prevent being the long-lasting damage that an attack can bring.
So network segmentation, is this sort of like if the attacker makes it through the front door, they get into the house, but then all of the doors to the rooms in the house, they're also locked?
Absolutely.
Right. So let's talk about backups for a moment. I know that in the case of Jackson County, the backups themselves became encrypted also. What steps can a business or government take to ensure that that's not a possibility?
Sure. So one of the keywords there is an offline backup. And in the case of Jackson County, theirs were nearline backups, so they were online but not actively being used. And that's a very resilient design, but it's not a very robust design to recover from. And so very much the same way that banks and a lot of other industries have focused on ensuring that regardless of the type of disaster, the systems can be recovered, those practices need to be replicated all over the place. And all the way down to our home lives. We need to make sure that when we back up the photos from our phone or whatever other personal data we're backing up, that when we put them on a remote hard drive, we then unplug that hard drive, right, that USB drive, and we set that drive aside. And in the case of a business function, government or anywhere, private sector, you want to make sure that you have more than one drive, so that you plug one drive in, you back it up, you unplug it, you take it away, and you bring a different drive for the next day or whatever cycle you're on. And so you're alternating, and then the last critical step that you have to do is you have to validate those copies. Somebody has to look at them separately and make sure the files you think are there are actually there. I can't tell you how many horror stories I've heard about people who thought they had a great backup program. They were doing it offline, they were taking them out, they even put them in a fire vault somewhere else. But when it came time to recover, nobody had ever validated that those backups were good. And so when they tried to load them, usually these are tape backup systems because these are old stories, but when they tried to load them, there was nothing on the tape because nobody ever double checked.
That would be a very difficult thing to discover, I think.
And hard to explain.
Yes, exactly. Jill, how has the work environment changed in Jackson County since the ransomware attacks?
Right. Andy talks about the fundamental things that you need to do to make your system more robust. So we have implemented a lot of those best practices as far as our technology goes. The segmented network, the backup system. We now have an air gap backup system, as Andy just talked about, where we are making sure that the data is being saved offline. One of the most challenging things, I believe, was for our employees to learn to work in this new environment. Before May of last year, our employees had a lot of leeway when it came to being able to get into our system. They were able to have administrative rights to download whatever software, remove whatever software they wanted to on the network, and we have locked our system down where they can't operate within our network like they used to, and that's been a little bit of a challenge, as well as just making sure that passwords are more complicated and systems are locked out when they're not being used, that sort of thing. And then just the awareness, that constantly educating them on how the attackers are wanting to get into our system, making sure that they're not clicking on emails that have bad links or downloading things that maybe could be malicious, that sort of thing. So there's a cultural change where we have a lot more thought process when we are working within our system.
Right. So oftentimes in information security, we talk about the balance between the need for security and the convenience to the person at the computer as they use their computer. Has that been somewhat of a challenge for you to sort of adjust that cultural expectation about how inconvenient some of these security measures might be?
Yes, no doubt. And it took us several months to get there. But I think after living through what Jackson County lived through last summer, everyone understands how important it is. Even though it is inconvenient, it's extremely important to make sure our information is safe. So we're continuing to grow, and we're better because of it.
Right. Andy, how are counties impacted by these attacks? Wouldn't it be easier to just pay the ransom?
You know, the temptation is certainly there to just pay a ransom, and I'll double back to that. But in terms of impact, they're impacted in ways that at the state level we never even considered before we started engaging in the planning process for response. Things like water systems are things that we did consider and that we are worried about, because these attacks can take out the actual water systems, the utilities, any of those kinds of things that are now more and more computer controlled. Any industrial system that's been automated and connected to the network, any of those things. But the more insidious, if you will, of the impacts are the business systems. Things like the titling system. You never think about the titling system until it's down. And the titling system is required to conduct business, transact real estate, really drive the economy of a local government. And every day those things are down can have massive impacts on the local economy. And those are things that we never even thought of before we started responding to these. And we first learned about when we responded to Jackson County. Also, it turns out that there's a statute that requires that cameras in police cars be up and running and recording in order for traffic stops to be valid. And in the case of Jackson County, that was another one of the systems that got taken out. So we were down to the storage amount in the cars. And if we ran out of the storage in the cars, the police officers from the sheriff's department, I guess they're sheriff's deputies, the sheriff's deputies would not be able to conduct traffic stops. That has a severe public safety impact. There's a ton of wide-ranging impacts. But as for paying the ransom, the temptation is definitely there. And I think it should be avoided at all costs. And I say at all costs almost to the extreme. And I realize there are shades of gray. We have to start to consider paying the ransom if there are imminent loss of life consequences, like if a hospital is taken out and we have a transplant patient on the table and we can save their life if we pay some money. I understand that. But in the case of just data, we really need to push back on this urge to pay. because it only incentivizes these evil people for the evil thing they've done. We're rewarding that behavior. And some of these ransoms, if you look to Florida, have been $600,000, $1 million, and they got paid. And when we pay them those amounts, they put that money right into their operations because they're funding their operations, no different than we're looking for funding for our operations. And any program that is, actually any program, my program included, give me another $1 million, I can do amazing things to improve our posture and not get hit. So my push is that we need to take the time to recognize the hazard for what it is, give it the upfront investment it needs so that we don't ever have to consider paying the ransom. And you have previously thrown the question to me, well, what if it's only $500? Well,
Right.
there's certainly an open question there around what if it's only $500. If it's only $500, you're going to get a lot of pushback. You're going to get a lot of people saying, you should just pay it and then we'll fix things. My experience tells me that if you do pay it, you're not going to fix things if you get your data back. Just it's not going to happen. Human nature, right? The problem went away, we're fine. But also for those people who do pay, only 70% roughly of the people who do pay actually get their data back. And of the ones who do get their data back, they only get a portion of the data back. Because over time, as systems change, encryption relies on things not changing to be successful in decrypting. And as systems change and bits flip and things get moved, the decryption keys don't work anymore. And so you end up in a position where you paid, you can't get your stuff back, and all that money that you could have used to make sure you were better is gone. And you still are only back to square one.
Right. Thanks, Andy. Please stay with us. Technically Speaking TV will be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Technically Speaking TV. So, Jill, what was your biggest takeaway from having gone through this experience?
Well, I think it's that cyber incidences can be a disaster, and we have got to plan for them just like we do any natural disaster. I think that we have to be more proactive. We need to look for ways to improve our systems. We need to talk about it more. I think local governments don't realize just how impactful these incidents can be, and we've got to start changing the culture whether it's with our employees, the leaders, we've got to do a better job of preparing ourselves.
Right. I think it was really interesting to me when you compared it to having gone through a hurricane or a tornado, right, a weather event, that for many of your staff, it felt like they'd been through this event.
And the difference is, with natural disasters, you really can't plan everything for them and protect for them 100%. And you can't protect yourself 100% from a cyber disaster. I'm not saying that, but I think we can do better in making our systems more robust and training our people to be more vigilant when it comes to working within our systems.
Andy, has the state changed the way that it is planning for cyber disasters as a result of these incidents?
Have we changed the way we're planning? No. Have we changed some of the things we're planning for? Absolutely.
Right.
I would say that the number one thing that we didn't know before we actually started using the plan, and we spent 2 years before Jill's incident down in Jackson County planning for what we would do if we had an incident that rose to the level of a disaster. And the thing we didn't realize is that communication goes beyond those affected. We never planned for being able to talk to the people who weren't affected by the current incident. And in the case of the August incident, when we had 23 municipalities, local entities, they weren't all municipalities, being impacted by one attack, we had a whole bunch of folks around the state just clamoring for information, and even folks from other states calling us, asking us for updates. We didn't have a built-in communication channel to get the word out to the folks who weren't affected. And even just to tell them that you weren't affected, if we haven't talked to you, you weren't affected. Or to tell them these are the things you can do, or literally nothing you could do could stop what happened. And that is actually the case in August. Nothing they could have done separately could have stopped it, because it was the result of a common service that they were all using, and anybody who wasn't using that service wasn't affected, right? And so we've worked on building out a communication channel for getting the word out and communicating with the folks who are not affected by the current incident. And then education and awareness. Jill mentioned education and awareness, teaching people how to be vigilant, how to not be the cause of letting the bad guy into your system. And that is an absolutely critical component, and we're working very hard to expand from just focusing on state agencies and higher education, state universities, to building out programs and providing content that can be leveraged at the local level. And the legislature actually pushed this with House Bill 3834 from the last legislature, which mandated cybersecurity education and awareness training for every public servant that has access to data.
Right. Jill, you talked about some of the changes that have happened within your county and the staff, and the fact that you compared this to a natural disaster. Do you test your plan for cybersecurity disasters now? Is that something that you guys are doing in Jackson County?
We're still working on that. It's been a process, but yes, having a plan in place as to how we're going to recover. We also have, with the help of the state, have done some penetration testing and security testing as well, just to see how good our system is. And I think we're doing well with that. We're always looking for ways to improve. But yes, it's one of those things that we're testing our employees and the system itself. And
by penetration testing, you're hiring an outside person to try and attack your systems, see how vulnerable they are? Yes. We are looking to get those to see if they can get into the system, and it's also social engineering. Will our people let them into the system? Right. Both aspects of it. Yes. Andy, I know that it's possible to buy insurance for ransomware or cyber incidents. Is that something that is a good idea? Is that something the state recommends?
So we did a study for Senate Bill 1910 from the 85th legislature around cybersecurity insurance. And the study had mixed results. At the state level, for state agencies, it's not recommended to buy a separate policy. The self-insurance policy, the State Office of Risk Management, and a whole bunch of other reasons why it doesn't make sense to have a state-level cybersecurity insurance policy. But at the local level, it sometimes does make sense. And in fact, the vast majority of local municipalities and county governments do have some form of cybersecurity insurance as a result of either the Texas Association of Counties or Texas Municipal League. It's not a significant amount of coverage, but when you're talking about very, very small places, even a little bit can go a long way.
Right. Does a home user, someone in their house with their personal data, do they need to be worried about ransomware?
Absolutely.
What can they do to help protect themselves?
Fundamentals. I'm glad you asked. All those same fundamentals that we talked about and that Jill talked about as well. It's the backing up. It's the not having things connected that shouldn't be connected. It's making sure you're not using an administrative account for every single thing. We call that the principle of least privilege. And it's being aware. And I skipped a finger, but it's being aware.
Right. So do you have any recommendations for backups for someone in personal use?
Sure. We live in an era of cheap storage. I totally recommend leveraging it. There are cloud options where you can pay just a couple bucks a month and back all of your stuff up to the cloud. There are also the local options. If you're talking about your laptop, you can back up your whole laptop. The average person's laptop has somewhere between 500 gigabytes and 2 terabytes. A 2 terabyte hard drive at the local store costs $79 now. And for $79, that's relatively inexpensive peace of mind. And then remembering to do it is the hard part.
And then unplug it.
Unplug it when you're done. Offline
Right.
backups, that's right. But remembering to do it, setting a reminder for yourself to actually go and back up your files. Because again, having a plan is only as good as using the plan. And so even in your personal life, you got to make sure you do it.
Excellent advice. Jill, Andy, thank you both so much for being here today to talk with us. And thanks again for watching. We hope you'll join us on the next episode of Technically Speaking TV.